It was 2 weeks ago on a Friday night when the first real blow hit me, and I still feel it echoing. I'd just gotten home from a long day at work. One of those days where you end up staying late because someone else screwed up and you've got to clean up the mess. I walked into the house, expecting the usual, a mix of chaos and comfort. Instead, there was this strange quietness hanging over everything, a silence that stuck to my skin like damp clothes. Jessica wasn't in the kitchen, which was odd. She's always there, unwinding by cooking some elaborate dish or at least preparing something for the kids. But the kitchen was empty. There was a half-open bottle of wine on the counter, and 2 glasses sitting there. One had a lipstick stain that looked fresh. The other was barely touched, just sitting there as though waiting for someone to pick it up. I walked through the house, calling her name, and found her in the living room. She was sitting there on the couch with her feet tucked underneath her, dressed in a way that didn't seem to match the occasion. She wore a tight black dress, the kind she usually only pulled out for special dates. It wasn't the kind of dress you put on to stay home on a Friday. There was something else. She was laughing, talking quietly on her phone, a smile on her lips that made my gut twist. She saw me, and her expression flickered, just for a second, before she composed herself. "Oh, hey babe," she said, waving me off like I was just a passing breeze. "I'm just catching up with an old friend." I didn't ask who. I didn't want to play the naive husband who buys whatever excuse gets tossed his way. I just looked at her, really looked at her, and she avoided my eyes. I could feel the tension under her breezy words, like a string pulled too tight, ready to snap. Something was there, something big, but I just nodded and turned away. I wasn't going to confront her like that, not with only half the pieces of the puzzle. I needed to know more. The next day, Jessica claimed she had to go into work on a Saturday. That was the first time I felt the sting of disbelief, like a wasp inside my chest. She'd never had to work weekends before, and the way she was dressed wasn't right for the office. Heels and that short floral dress she knows I like. She gave me a kiss on the cheek before she left, a kiss that felt hollow, like it was an empty promise. I decided to follow her. I got the kids set up with some cartoons, told them Daddy had to run an errand, and slipped out of the house, trying to stay far enough behind so she wouldn't notice. My heart pounded as I watched her car, the taillights ahead of me, guiding me towards the truth I wasn't ready to see. I felt sick, part of me hoping I was wrong, that maybe I was just paranoid. She didn't head downtown towards her office. Instead, she drove across town to a small, out-of-the-way coffee shop, a place we'd never been to together. My stomach tightened as I watched her get out of the car. She didn't go in alone. A man was waiting for her outside, tall, with a leather jacket. I watched as she walked straight up to him and, without hesitation, put her arms around his neck and kissed him. It wasn't a friendly peck. It was intimate, lingering, the kind of kiss that cuts into your soul when you see it happening with someone who isn't you. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly I thought I might snap it. I could barely process what I was seeing. My wife, standing there with another man, looking happier than she had with me in months. I knew I had to confront her, but not there, not like this. I snapped a few pictures with my phone, my hand shaking, heart hammering so loud I thought I might pass out. I needed proof not just for myself, but for whatever came next. I sat there, watching them go inside, my vision narrowing until all I could see was red. This wasn't just some fling. It wasn't something I could just ignore. This was betrayal as raw as it gets, and I had a feeling it went deeper than I knew that I spent the rest of that Saturday in a daze. I drove back home, parked in the driveway, and sat there, just staring at the house. Our kids were inside, their laughter drifting faintly out through the window, and all I could think was how nothing would ever be the same. Jessica didn't come back until late afternoon. She walked in with a casual smile, holding a grocery bag like she'd just been out running errands. "Hey, sorry I took so long. The lines were insane," she said, placing the bag on the counter. She didn't meet my eyes, and I didn't push her. My insides were burning, and I could feel the sharp, dark fury building up, but I kept it bottled up tight. Not yet, I told myself. I needed her to tell me the truth, and I knew I wouldn't get it by blowing up on her right then and there. I decided to go deeper. That night, while she was putting the kids to bed, I took her phone. She'd left it in the kitchen, unlocked, like she didn't have a care in the world. I opened her messages, feeling like a thief, my palms sweaty and heart pounding. There was a thread with Tom, the guy I'd seen her with earlier. I scrolled up, reading through a history that made me want to break every dish in the kitchen. Messages about meeting up, how much she missed him, how excited she was for their getaway. I found myself shaking as I read her words, lines full of affection and inside jokes, pieces of a relationship that she had no right to. I stumbled on messages that mentioned a hotel, someplace out by the highway, and her talking about spending an entire weekend with him, claiming she had a work retreat. My world narrowed down to those words, each one feeling like a punch to the gut. She'd been lying to me for months. Every work event, every girls' night out, they were all with him. I scrolled through photos, pictures of them together, his arm around her waist, her head leaning on his shoulder. In one, she wore the same dress she'd worn to our last anniversary dinner. It felt like a cruel joke, as if she'd taken the love I thought was ours and given it to someone else, dressed in the very memories that belonged to me. I heard her footsteps coming down the stairs, and I quickly locked the phone, placing it back exactly where I'd found it. I leaned against the counter, trying to look casual, my heart still hammering in my ears. She walked into the kitchen and smiled at me. That same easy smile she'd been giving me for years, and I wanted to scream. I forced myself to smile back, pretending, playing the role of the clueless husband. The next day, I made my move. I told Jessica I had an old buddy from college coming into town, and I'd be meeting him for dinner that night. She seemed relieved, like she was glad to have the evening to herself. "Take your time, have fun," she said, giving me a quick kiss that tasted like deceit. Instead of meeting anyone, I drove back to that same coffee shop. I parked across the street, and I waited. I knew she'd go back to him. I could feel it in my bones, like some sick kind of clockwork. Sure enough, around 6, I saw her car pull up, and there she was. This time she wasn't alone. Tom was with her, his arm around her waist, and they were laughing about something. They looked comfortable, like this was their usual spot, like they belonged there together. I watched as they left the cafe and got into Tom's car. They drove off and I followed. My hands felt ice cold, but my head was hot, thoughts whirling in a tornado of rage, betrayal, and hurt. They ended up at the hotel, just like she'd mentioned in those texts. It was a cheap place, the kind with flickering neon lights and rooms you pay for by the hour. Seeing her go inside, wrapped around him, felt like the final nail in the coffin of everything I believed in. I sat in the parking lot, staring at that cheap motel, my mind racing. I knew I had to confront her, and I knew it had to be soon. But I wanted her to look me in the eye and admit it. No more lies, no more empty smiles. I wanted her to say it, to face the destruction she'd caused. I wanted her to know that one mistake she made, choosing to betray me, to betray our family, was about to end everything we'd built. I drove home that night with a strange sense of calm settling over me. I'd seen enough, and I'd learned what I needed to know. Jessica wasn't my wife anymore. Not really. She'd made her choice, and now it was my turn to decide what came next. Sunday morning, the house felt different, like I was in someone else's life. The kids were in the backyard, playing on the swings, and Jessica was in the kitchen humming, cooking pancakes like nothing was wrong. The scent of coffee and syrup filled the air, a cruel contrast to the storm raging inside my chest. I watched her move, flipping pancakes with that same old familiarity, but all I could see were those pictures in my phone, the ones I had taken of her wrapped around him. She glanced over at me and smiled. "Morning, sleepyhead. You were out late last night. How was your friend?" The casual way she asked, her voice so sweet, almost made me laugh. How was my friend? I had to grip the counter to keep my emotions in check, forcing myself to keep a straight face. I nodded and muttered, "It was fine," before turning my eyes away. It was amazing how easily she lied, how naturally it seemed to come to her. I knew I couldn't go on pretending much longer. I felt like an actor, playing a role in a twisted, bitter play, and my lines were running out. That evening, as the kids watched cartoons, I found Jessica in our bedroom, folding laundry. She looked up, and I caught a flicker of something in her eyes when she saw my expression. Maybe uncertainty or just a break in that perfect mask she'd been wearing. "Jessica?" I said, my voice steady but the anger bubbling just beneath. "We need to talk." She paused, her hands stilling on a stack of folded shirts, but she gave me that innocent look, tilting her head slightly. "Sure, what's up?" I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I pulled my phone from my pocket, swiping to the pictures of her and Tom, and handed it to her. I watched as her face changed, the color draining, her eyes widening as she stared at the screen. She blinked once, then twice, her mouth opening and closing like she couldn't quite figure out what to say. The silence stretched, and in that moment, everything I'd feared became true. Her guilt written clearly in the way her shoulders sagged, in the way she looked at me with panic. "Adam, I can explain," she finally said, her voice shaky, reaching out as if she could erase the proof right there in my hand. I stepped back, just out of her reach. "Explain what, Jessica? Explain how you've been seeing someone else for months? Or maybe explain why you lied every time you left this house? The girls' nights, the work trips, they were all for him, weren't they?" My voice rose despite myself, years of anger and hurt spilling out. She looked at me, her expression hardening. It wasn't guilt that I saw next, but irritation, like I was the one causing the problem. "Look, it wasn't supposed to be like this," she snapped, dropping the pretense. "Tom, he understands me in a way you don't, Adam. Things between us haven't been right for a long time, and you know it." There it was, the blame. She was trying to twist it back onto me, like her betrayal was somehow justified because our marriage had hit a rough patch. I felt my hands clench into fists, not because I wanted to hurt her, but because I needed to keep myself steady. "You're really going to put this on me?" I asked, my voice low, trembling with restraint. "If things weren't right, you could have talked to me. We could have worked on it. But no, you chose to go behind my back, to lie over and over again, to break everything we built. You chose him." Jessica's eyes narrowed, her face transforming into something almost unrecognizable. "Maybe I did, Adam. Maybe I chose him because I'm tired of feeling like I'm just existing here, like I'm invisible. You never notice me anymore. You're always busy, always distracted, and Tom makes me feel alive again." The words cut deep, each one like a shard of glass. I had been busy. Sure, work was hectic, and with the kids and everything else, maybe I had taken things for granted. But nothing justified what she'd done. She looked at me, defiant, like she was daring me to disagree, like she wanted to strip away every last ounce of the person I thought I knew. "So that's it then?" I said, my voice breaking. "You've already made your choice?" She didn't say anything, but the look in her eyes was enough. I turned and walked out of the room, my heart pounding, rage and sorrow crashing into each other inside me. A storm that had no way of breaking. I went to the backyard where our kids were still playing. I watched them for a while, their laughter echoing in the air, and I realized just how much had to change now. I couldn't stay in a home where trust had been shattered like this. I couldn't stay with a woman who looked me in the eye and blamed me for her betrayal. One mistake, one choice she had made had ended everything. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed on the couch, staring at the ceiling, thinking about how I'd tell the kids, about how I'd have to explain that mommy and daddy weren't going to be living together anymore. My world had splintered, and all I could do now was try to pick up the pieces that mattered most. My kids, my sanity, and whatever kind of future I could carve out of this wreckage. Monday morning, everything felt like a cruel echo of the life I used to live. I was still in the same house, surrounded by the same walls, but they felt like they were caving in. The kids were at the breakfast table, chatting about school, oblivious to the war that had ignited between their parents. Jessica moved around the kitchen with mechanical precision, pouring cereal, making small talk, her eyes avoiding mine. I had made up my mind. I couldn't let this charade continue, not for my own sanity and certainly not for the kids' sake. After dropping them off at school, I decided to take a day off work. It was time for a real conversation, one without the facade of family breakfasts or pretending that what we had wasn't already ruined. Jessica was surprised to see me back so soon. She was in the living room, scrolling through her phone, her feet tucked under her on the couch, the same posture she had when I caught her talking to Tom that first time. I stood there watching her for a moment, and she looked up, startled. I saw a flash of something in her eyes. Annoyance, perhaps, that her comfortable routine had been interrupted. "We need to figure out what's next," I said, my voice steady, despite the adrenaline surging through me. Jessica's expression hardened, and she put down her phone, sighing heavily like I was just another inconvenience. "Adam, Can we not do this right now? She said, leaning back and crossing her arms. The kids. No, Jess. We have to do this now. I cut her off, stepping closer. You owe me that much. They deserve to know what's going on, and I need to understand where we go from here. She stared at me for a long moment, then rolled her eyes. Fine, Adam. What do you want to talk about? Do you want me to apologize? Do you want me to say I'm sorry that I fell out of love with you? Her words dripped with contempt, each one cutting deeper than the last. Apologize, I said, letting out a sharp, humorless laugh. You think an apology would fix this? This isn't about just saying sorry, Jess. This is about you deciding over and over that lying to me, lying to our children, was easier than just being honest. You were the one who decided that what we had wasn't worth saving. She shook her head, her jaw clenching. Do you think it was easy for me, Adam? Do you think I wanted this? I tried. I tried for years to get your attention, to get you to notice me, to do something other than bury yourself in work and pretend everything was fine. I felt my anger flare up again, hot and wild. Don't you dare put this on me. I know I've made mistakes. I know I've been caught up with work, but I've always been here, Jessica. I've always been here for our family, for you. And you, I pointed at her, my voice trembling. You decided to turn your back on everything we built, on every promise you made to me. There was a moment of silence, thick and heavy, hanging between us. Then, she suddenly stood up, her face twisting into a sneer. You know what, Adam? Maybe I did. Maybe I'm tired of being the one to hold everything together while you just coast along, thinking everything is fine. Tom listens to me. He actually cares. Tom, I repeated, the name leaving a bitter taste in my mouth. You mean the guy who meets you in shady motels and sneaks around behind his own wife's back? That's the man you're willing to throw your family away for? You think that's love, Jess? It's a lie, just like everything you've been doing. For a split second, I thought I saw a flicker of doubt in her eyes, but it was gone before I could be sure. She turned her back to me, her voice dropping. You don't understand. It's more complicated than that. No, Jess, I said, stepping forward, my voice low but firm. It's simple. You broke us. You broke me. And now you need to tell me what you want. Do you want to stay here, pretending, lying to our children, acting like we're still some perfect little family? Or are you ready to own up to what you've done? She turned around, her eyes cold and narrowed. You think I'm just going to walk away, leave my kids, leave this house and let you play the martyr? This is my home too, Adam. I'm not going anywhere. That's when it really hit me. She wasn't sorry. She wasn't remorseful. To her, this was all some battle of wills, a power struggle over who would get to stay, who would get to claim the life we'd built. She had no intention of admitting she was wrong, no intention of making this right. She was ready to fight me for every inch of this wrecked marriage, for every piece of a life that she had already shattered. A strange calm settled over me then. I realized that the woman standing in front of me wasn't the person I thought I'd married. She was a stranger, someone who looked like Jessica but who had lost every trace of the warmth and kindness that had drawn me to her in the first place. I nodded slowly, feeling the weight of the decision forming in my chest. Fine, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. If that's how you want it, then that's what you'll get. But I'm not staying here and pretending. Not for you, not for anyone. We're done, Jess. I'll talk to a lawyer tomorrow. You can stay here for now, but I'm taking the kids. They deserve to be around someone who actually cares about them, not someone who's too busy sneaking around with Tom. For the first time, real fear flashed across her face. You can't just take them, Adam. I held her gaze, my expression hardening. Watch me. I turned and walked out, my hands trembling but my resolve unshakable. It was the hardest decision I'd ever made, but I knew it was the only way to protect what mattered most to me. I had tried to understand, tried to find a way through the lies, but Jessica had burned every bridge, left nothing but ashes behind. I had spent too much time clinging to the hope that somehow we could fix this. But now, I realized that the woman I had loved was gone, replaced by someone who saw our life as disposable. And that was something I could never forgive. I spent the night in a small, cheap hotel. The walls were thin, and I could hear the muffled sounds of the people in the next room. Arguing, laughing, someone dropping something heavy. The world outside was going on like nothing had changed, while mine had split apart. I stared at the ceiling, running the conversation with Jessica over and over in my mind, trying to find some clue, some hint that there was something left to save. But there wasn't. The next morning, I found a lawyer. I had never imagined myself sitting across from someone like that, explaining my situation, my wife's betrayal, and what I wanted to do about it. The lawyer, Mr. Hendricks, was calm, practical. He'd heard it all before. He explained my options, custody arrangements, the house, the process. It was clinical, the way he talked about dismantling my life into manageable parts. I nodded, signing the papers, feeling strangely detached, like I was watching someone else take these steps. I went back home that afternoon, ready for whatever came next. I wasn't sure if Jessica would even be there. Part of me almost hoped she wouldn't be. Maybe she'd be off with Tom, running away from the mess she'd made. But when I opened the door, I found her in the kitchen again, like nothing had happened. She was chopping vegetables, her back to me, and for a brief moment, I just stood there, watching her. It looked so normal, so painfully domestic, that I felt a surge of anger rising again. "We need to talk," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. She flinched, turning to face me, and I could see she had been expecting this. Her face was set in a stubborn line, her eyes narrowed. "Are we really doing this now, Adam?" she asked, her voice tired, almost bored. I took a deep breath, stepping closer. "Yes, we are. I went to see a lawyer today. I'm filing for divorce." Jessica's hands stilled, the knife clattering onto the cutting board. Her face blanched, but I could see the flicker of defiance behind her shock. "You can't just decide that on your own. We need to talk about this, about what's best for the kids." I shook my head. "I did talk about it with myself. I'm not going to stay here while you carry on with him, lying to our faces every day. You made your choice, Jess, and I'm making mine." She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. She looked down at the counter, her fingers curling into fists. "So, that's it," she finally said, her voice shaking. "You're just going to walk away?" "Walk away?" I let out a bitter laugh. "You're the one who walked away from us the moment you decided to be with Tom." I tried, Jess. I tried to find a way to make sense of this, but you made it clear that I don't matter to you anymore. The only thing left now is to figure out what happens next. She glared at me, her eyes blazing. "And what happens next, Adam? You think you're just going to take the kids and leave me here with nothing? You think I'm going to let you do that?" I took a step closer, my hands trembling, not with fear but with determination. "I'm not taking them away from you, but I am taking them with me. We'll figure out custody. But I refuse to let them live in a house full of lies. If you want to fight me on this, then go ahead. But I promise you, I'll do whatever it takes to make sure they're safe and away from this mess you've created." For a moment, I thought she might scream, that she might lash out, but instead, her shoulders slumped. She looked at me, and for the first time in weeks, I saw something real: fear. It was raw, unguarded, and I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "You really think you're the perfect one here, don't you?" she said, her voice cracking. "You think you're blameless, but you're not. You pushed me away, Adam. You stopped caring about me long before I met Tom." I swallowed hard, the words landing heavy. Maybe there was truth in what she said. Maybe I had been absent, too caught up in work, in everything else. But that wasn't an excuse for what she did, for how she chose to destroy us instead of trying to fix what was broken. "Maybe I wasn't perfect," I admitted, my voice low, almost a whisper. "But I didn't betray you. I didn't lie to you. I didn't destroy our family because I was unhappy. You did that, Jess. You and only you." She looked at me, her eyes wide, her mouth open like she wanted to argue, but no words came out. I could see the walls she had built around herself beginning to crack. She wasn't expecting this. She thought I would fight to keep her, that I would beg for her to come back. But I was done. I had seen enough. I turned away, heading towards the stairs. "I'll be staying in the guest room for now. I'll let you know when I plan to move out. We'll tell the kids together, once we've figured it out." I heard her sob, just once, a raw, choked sound that echoed in the quiet of the house. But I didn't turn back. I couldn't let myself be pulled into her pain. Not anymore. I had my own pain to deal with, my own heart to mend, and I knew that I had to be strong for my kids. Jessica's tears were no longer my concern. As I climbed the stairs, I felt a strange sense of relief, like a heavy weight had finally been lifted off my shoulders. I knew the hardest part was still ahead, telling the kids, splitting our lives into two. But I also knew that I had finally taken control. Jessica had shattered everything we had, but I was determined to pick up what pieces I could and build something new. There was no going back now, and as painful as that was, it also felt right. The truth was out, the masks were off, and we could no longer pretend. The life I thought I had was gone. But for the first time in weeks, I could see a way forward. A way to heal, a way to rebuild, a way to start again. The hardest part was telling the kids. I spent the next few days figuring out how to say the words, rehearsing in front of the mirror, the phrases getting stuck in my throat each time. How do you explain to two innocent children that their world is about to change forever? How do you shatter their sense of security while trying to hold on to whatever semblance of love and stability you have left for them? Jessica and I barely spoke, each of us a ghost haunting different corners of the house. She knew it was coming, and I think in her own way she was scared of it too. We'd agreed to do it on Saturday, over breakfast, when we'd have the whole day to handle the aftermath. I could tell she wanted to delay, but I was firm. The longer we pretended, the worse it would be. Saturday morning came, and I felt like I was walking to the gallows. The kids were at the table, their little faces lighting up when they saw me coming in. My daughter, Emma, gave me a big smile. "Daddy, look, I drew a picture of all of us at the zoo." She held up a crayon drawing of our family, all of us standing in front of the lion's den, smiling. My heart clenched at the sight of it. Our family, together and happy. A version of us that was about to disappear forever. I knelt down, brushing a strand of her hair behind her ear. "That's beautiful, Emma," I said, my voice barely steady. "Can you sit down for a minute, sweetheart? Daddy and Mommy need to talk to you and your brother." Jessica sat down opposite me, her eyes puffy from nights of restless sleep. She nodded at the kids, trying to force a smile, but it looked more like a grimace. I took a deep breath, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Emma, Jason," I began, my voice cracking a little. I had to clear my throat before I could continue. "Mommy and Daddy have something important to tell you." Emma's smile faded, her little brows furrowing. Jason, who was only 7, looked from me to Jessica, sensing the heaviness in the air. I wished I could shield them from this moment, that I could keep them innocent and unaware, but I knew that wasn't an option anymore. "Your mom and I glanced at Jessica, who was staring down at her hands. "We love you both so much, but sometimes grown-ups, sometimes they stop being able to live together in the same way. We've decided that we aren't going to be living in the same house anymore." Emma's eyes widened, her face crumpling. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Are you leaving, Daddy?" I felt my heart shatter right there, the words cutting through me. I reached out, taking her small hand in mine. "Sweetheart, I'm not leaving you. Never. I'm always going to be your daddy, and I'm always going to be here for you and Jason. But Mommy and I won't be living together anymore." Jason looked confused, his eyes darting between us. "Are we still going to be a family?" he asked, his voice small. Jessica finally looked up, her eyes shining with tears. She reached out to touch Jason's shoulder. "Yes, sweetheart," she said, her voice thick. "We're always going to be a family. No matter what happens, we love you both, and that will never, ever change." Emma's face crumpled, and she started to cry. The sound tore through me, each sob a reminder of what had been broken. I pulled her into my arms, holding her tightly, whispering that I loved her, that everything was going to be okay. But I knew it wasn't okay, not really. It was going to be different, and it was going to hurt, and there was nothing I could do to fix that. Jessica tried to hug Jason, but he pulled away, his little face scrunched up in anger. "Why?" he shouted, his voice cracking. "Why can't you just stay? Why does everything have to change?" Jessica's tears spilled over, and she reached for him again. But he stood up, pushing his chair back, running to his room. The sound of his door slamming echoed through the house, the final punctuation to a moment I had dreaded since this all began. I held Emma until her sobs turned into sniffles, her small body sagging against me. I kissed the top of her head, whispering again and again that I loved her, that we were going to be okay. Jessica sat across the table, her face buried in her hands, her shoulders shaking as she cried. When Emma finally calmed down, I led her to the living room, setting her up with her favorite cartoons. I promised her I'd be right back, and then I walked back to the kitchen where Jessica still sat, her tears quiet now, her expression empty. She looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen, and for a moment, we just stared at each other, the weight of everything that had happened settling between us. "You think this is easy for me?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You think I wanted to break their hearts like this?" I shook my head, my own tears threatening to spill. "No, Jess, I don't think it's easy for you, but it's the consequence of what you did. You made a choice, and this is what it led to. It's hard for all of us, but especially for them. And now we need to do whatever we can to make it right for them." She nodded, looking away, her eyes glazing over. "I know," she said softly. "I know I messed up, but I love them, Adam. I love them so much." For the first time in weeks, I felt something soften in me, a tiny spark of empathy for her pain. She was still their mother, and despite everything, she loved them. We both did. And somehow, despite all the anger, all the betrayal, we were going to have to find a way to make this work. For them. "Then let's focus on that," I said, my voice steadying. "Let's make sure they come first, no matter what." She looked up at me, her eyes filled with something I hadn't seen in a long time. Regret. Maybe even a hint of the woman I'd once loved. She nodded, her lips pressing into a thin line. "Okay," she whispered. "For them." I left her sitting there and walked back to the living room, sitting down next to Emma, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. She leaned into me, her eyes glued to the TV, and I knew that no matter what happened between Jessica and me, I'd fight for these moments. I'd fight for my kids, for their happiness, for their sense of safety. I couldn't save my marriage, but I could still be the father they needed. And that, at least, was something worth holding on to. The days that followed were a strange mix of normalcy and upheaval. I slept in the guest room, my clothes stuffed into a suitcase at the foot of the bed. Jessica and I moved around each other like two people forced to coexist in a place that no longer felt like home. The kids were confused, asking every night if things could go back to how they used to be. Each time, I found myself at a loss for words. The pain in their eyes was the hardest part of all of this, and I had to constantly remind myself that even if I hated Jessica for what she did, the kids needed us both. One afternoon, while Jessica was out, I packed up my things. I called my friend Mark, who'd offered me his spare room for a while until I found my own place. He showed up with his truck, helping me load my boxes without asking too many questions. He knew what had happened, at least the broad strokes, and he gave me that silent support only a real friend can offer. It was surreal, moving my life into the back of his truck, carrying box after box filled with the remnants of a life that had just disintegrated. Every time I placed a box down, it felt like I was putting away a piece of myself. Memories, hopes, the promise of a future that no longer existed. Emma and Jason were at school, and that was a small mercy. They wouldn't have to see me leave, wouldn't have to witness their father walk out the door, even if it was just temporary. When I finished, I stood in the empty guest room for a moment, staring at the bare mattress, the empty dresser. This was where I had spent the last few weeks, and even though it had felt like a prison, there was something final and heartbreaking about leaving it behind. As I walked down the stairs, Jessica came in. She must have seen the truck out front because her face went pale the moment our eyes met. She looked at the boxes in my hands and then back at me, her mouth opening like she wanted to say something, but no words came out. I set the boxes down by the door, taking a breath before turning to her. "I'm leaving today," I said simply. She nodded, her eyes brimming with tears. I didn't think it would be so soon," she whispered. "It's time," I said. My voice was cold, detached. I didn't want to be angry anymore. I was tired of it, and honestly, I just wanted to be done with this chapter of my life. "I'm going to take the kids this weekend, and I'll pick them up after school. We can work out a schedule from there. But for now, I think we all need some space." She stepped forward, her voice breaking as she spoke. "Adam, I know I can't take back what I did. I know I hurt you, and I've ruined everything, but I want you to know that I'm sorry. I never meant for it to end like this. I looked at her, really looked at her. And for the first time, I realized I didn't feel the same sense of rage anymore. I was still hurt, still wounded, but the anger had drained away, leaving me feeling almost empty. I sighed, shaking my head slowly. Jess, I believe you're sorry, but it doesn't change what happened. You made your choices, and now I'm making mine. Tears spilled down her cheeks, and she didn't try to stop them. What about the kids? She asked, her voice trembling. I don't want them to hate me, Adam. I don't want to lose them. I swallowed hard, feeling my own throat tighten. They won't hate you, Jess. They're confused, and they're hurt, but they love you. You're their mother, and nothing will change that. Just be there for them. Be honest with them from now on. That's all we can do. She nodded, wiping her eyes, and for a moment, there was a silence between us, thick and heavy with everything we'd lost. Then, without another word, I picked up the boxes and carried them out to the truck. Mark was waiting, leaning against the side of the truck, his face carefully neutral. He gave me a small nod, a signal that he was there for whatever I needed. I climbed into the passenger seat, slamming the door shut. As we pulled away, I glanced back at the house that had once been my home. Jessica stood in the doorway, her figure growing smaller in the side mirror until it finally disappeared. The drive to Mark's place was quiet, neither of us saying much. He knew when to talk and when to stay silent, and I was grateful for that. When we arrived, we carried the boxes up to the small, spare room he'd cleared out for me. It wasn't much, just a bed and a dresser, but it was a start. It was a place where I could begin again. That night, I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor, the silence pressing in around me. I pulled out my phone, scrolling through the photos of Emma and Jason. Pictures of birthday parties, family outings, those goofy smiles they always had. My heart ached with longing, and I promised myself that I would do everything in my power to give them stability, even if that meant doing it on my own. I sent Jessica a text message. I'll pick the kids up at 3 on Friday. Let me know if they need anything for the weekend. Her reply came almost instantly. Okay. Thank you, Adam. I stared at the screen for a long moment, then put the phone down. There was no point dwelling on what was gone. My focus had to be on what was left. My children, my life, and the future I still had the chance to build. It was strange, the way the emptiness felt both crushing and liberating. I was free of the lies, free of the betrayal, but I was also untethered, left to navigate a life I hadn't planned for. I didn't know what came next, and that terrified me. But in that small room, with nothing but my boxes of belongings and the faint sound of cars passing by outside, I found a glimmer of hope. It wasn't much, just a flicker, but it was enough. Enough to remind me that I still had something to fight for, that I still had a chance to create something new out of the ashes of what had been. I lay down, staring at the ceiling, my mind drifting to Emma and Jason, their smiles, their laughter. I knew the road ahead would be hard, filled with difficult conversations, painful moments, and challenges I couldn't yet foresee. But I also knew I wouldn't be walking it alone. I had my kids, and I had people like Mark, who were there to help me get back on my feet. For now, that was enough. Friday came quickly. I spent the whole week at Mark's, settling into my new reality. The mornings were empty without the chaos of breakfast, without Emma's chatter or Jason's insistence that he wear his favorite shirt again. Instead, I found myself with too much time and too many thoughts. Echoes of everything that had happened, everything that had gone wrong. Mark was patient with me, but even he could only do so much. This was my journey to walk, and no one could take the steps for me. The hours crawled by until it was finally time to go pick up Emma and Jason. I drove to the house, the one that used to feel like home, with a mix of excitement and dread. I had missed my kids deeply, and even though I'd only been gone a few days, it felt like an eternity. But I also knew that seeing Jessica would be another reminder of the distance between what once was and what now stood in its place. When I pulled up to the house, Jason was already outside, his backpack slung over one shoulder, and Emma stood on the porch beside Jessica. The sight of them, my children standing next to the woman who had once been my partner, hit me like a punch. It was a strange, uncomfortable contrast between past and present, between the life we had and the one that was now unfolding. "Daddy," Emma yelled, her face lighting up as she ran toward me. I knelt down, scooping her into my arms, holding her tight. Jason followed more slowly, his expression a mix of excitement and hesitation. I hugged him too, holding both of them close, feeling their warmth seep into me like a balm for the ache that had settled in my chest. Jessica stood there, her arms crossed, a sad smile on her face. She watched as I hugged the kids, and for a moment, our eyes met. There was a flicker of something in her gaze, a hint of regret, or maybe just a sadness that matched my own. She stepped forward, her voice soft. They're all packed. Jason has a soccer game tomorrow, so make sure he gets to the field by 9. Okay. I nodded. Of course. We'll be there. She hesitated, then reached out, touching Emma's shoulder lightly. You two behave for Daddy. Okay? I'll see you on Sunday. Emma nodded, her lip trembling just a little, and Jason looked down, kicking at the dirt. I could see the pain in their eyes, the confusion that still hadn't settled. It twisted inside me, a reminder of how much they were carrying because of our mistakes. Jessica gave me a quick look, then turned and walked back to the house, closing the door softly behind her. I stood there for a moment, holding my children close, watching that door, feeling the finality of it. Then I shook myself, turning my attention back to the two most important people in my life. All right, you two, who's ready for a fun weekend? I asked, trying to inject some enthusiasm into my voice. Emma smiled up at me, her eyes brightening a little, and Jason nodded, a small grin spreading across his face. We drove to Mark's, and I tried my best to keep the mood light, talking about their week at school, about their friends. They seemed to relax, leaning into the familiar rhythm of our conversation, and I felt a little bit of the weight lift from my shoulders. Maybe I could still give them what they needed. Maybe even after everything, I could be enough for them. That night, we made pizza together in Mark's kitchen. Emma insisted on putting pepperoni in the shape of a smiley face, and Jason carefully lined up the mushrooms like he was designing a masterpiece. Mark joined us, joking around with the kids, making them laugh until I could see the worry slipping away from their faces, replaced with the joy I remembered so well. Later, when the kids were asleep, Emma curled up in the spare bed I'd set up for her, Jason in a sleeping bag on the floor beside her. I sat out on the porch with Mark, a beer in hand, staring out at the quiet street. The cool night air felt good, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I allowed myself to relax. "You're doing all right, man," Mark said, breaking the silence. He took a sip of his beer, his gaze steady on mine. "I mean it. The kids, they're gonna be okay. You're giving them what they need." I nodded, my eyes stinging a little. "I hope so. I never wanted this for them. I never wanted them to grow up in two different homes, feeling like they have to choose sides." Mark sighed, leaning back in his chair. "No one wants that, Adam. But the fact is, you're here. You're showing up. You're making sure they know they're loved, and that's what matters. They'll remember that, more than anything else." I looked down at the bottle in my hand, turning it slowly. I still hate her, you know? Not all the time, not every second, but it's there. The betrayal, the lies. I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive her. Mark was silent for a moment, then nodded. "You don't have to forgive her. Not right now, maybe not ever. But you do have to find a way to let it go, for your own sake. Holding on to that anger, it's only gonna eat you alive." and a new life to build with my kids. And that, I realized, was worth everything.